It took me years, but I finally walked away. From a life of constant abuse to reclaiming my freedom. For too long, I stayed silent and endured the pain. But the day came when I found the courage to leave and never look back. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I first encountered the storm that would completely uproot my life. The sky was dark and heavy with clouds, a mirror of the turmoil brewing within the walls of my home. My heart raced as I paced back and forth in the living room, trying to make sense of the situation that had just been thrust upon me. The phone call from my sister Claire was still ringing in my ears, echoing in my mind like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. This wasn't the usual call from Claire. This was different. This was urgent, terrifying, and it left me in a state of disbelief. Claire had been struggling for months, trying to keep everything together while hiding the mounting problems in her life. But now things had reached a breaking point. Her financial troubles were no longer something she could manage alone. Debts she'd tried to outrun were closing in on her, and in a desperate attempt to dig herself out of the hole, she had borrowed money from the wrong people who didn't care about her well-being. Loan sharks, dangerous people. Now they were after her, demanding repayment, and Claire was terrified. Her voice trembled on the other end of the phone. "They're coming after me, and I don't know what to do. Please, I need your help. I don't have anyone else." I felt a knot twist in my stomach. The desperation in her voice shattered something inside me. How could I say no? How could I turn my back on my sister when she needed me most? But at the same time, how could I help? I had my own problems to worry about. My job, the mortgage, my own growing debts. I didn't have extra money to lend her. I had nothing to give. Yet, as the silence stretched between us, I realized I couldn't just leave her to face this alone. I spent the rest of the day lost in thought, weighing my options. I didn't know how I could possibly fix this, but I knew I couldn't stand by while my sister was in danger. That evening, I sat down with Dave, my husband of 6 years. We lived in a small, modest house in a quiet neighborhood. We had a good life, but things were always tight financially. Dave was supportive, yes, but he was also practical. He wasn't someone who took risks easily, especially when it came to money. And this was a huge risk. "Dave, I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice low and hesitant. "It's about Claire. She's in serious trouble and she needs my help. She's in debt to some really dangerous people." Dave set his newspaper down and looked at me. With concern, though, I could see the worry creeping into his eyes. "What kind of trouble? And what do you mean, dangerous people?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "She owes money to loan sharks. They've been threatening her, and now they're coming after her. I have to help her, Dave. I can't just let her face this alone." His eyes narrowed and he leaned back in his chair. "We can't afford to take on more debt. You know that. We're barely getting by as it is. And you're asking me to help her. With what exactly? How are we supposed to help her without digging ourselves deeper into our own problems?" I could see his point. We were living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to keep up with bills. The thought of borrowing more money, taking on more debt, it was terrifying, but my heart was already made up. I couldn't leave Claire in this mess. "I know," I said, feeling my throat tighten, "but she's my sister, Dave. I can't just let her be alone in this. She's already scared, and I'm the only one she's asking for help." Dave didn't respond right away. He rubbed his forehead and looked away, clearly torn. I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He was worried about the same things I was, but I knew there was no other choice. "I'll help her," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. "I have to. I know it's a risk, but she's family. We can figure it out, I promise." Dave looked at me, his face a mixture of frustration and resignation. He didn't like it, but he knew me too well to argue. He knew once I'd made up my mind, there was no changing it. And so I began making plans. I reached out to friends and family, trying to scrape together the money Claire needed to pay off the loan sharks and buy her some time. I called my mom, my aunt, anyone I could think of who might be able to help, even if it was just a little bit. I knew that if I didn't act fast, the consequences could be devastating. For the first few days, I was consumed by the overwhelming task ahead. The constant phone calls, the financial juggling, the stress of not knowing if I was doing enough. It was too much to handle, but I couldn't stop. Claire was depending on me. As the days passed, I found myself sinking deeper into the situation. The loan sharks weren't just an abstract problem anymore. They were real, and they were coming closer. I could feel their presence in every call I made, in every decision I had to make. I was walking a tightrope, and I couldn't afford to fall. But as the days wore on, I began to realize something. My marriage, my life, my everything had started to feel like a house of cards teetering on the edge. I was trying to hold everything together, but the weight of it all was becoming too much. Dave wasn't happy about the situation, and his quiet disapproval had started to wear me down. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything. The stress, the fear, the constant pressure. And now, with Claire's crisis consuming all of my energy, I couldn't help but feel the cracks in my marriage widening. Despite all of my efforts, the situation with Claire didn't improve. Fact, it got worse. The loan sharks began threatening her more aggressively, showing up at her apartment and demanding payment. She was living in constant fear. I could hear the panic in her voice every time we spoke. I tried everything I could think of to help her, but nothing seemed to work. My own life, my marriage, my sanity, it was all beginning to unravel. I had put everything on the line for Claire, but it was clear that this wasn't just about helping her anymore. It was about me too. I had to stop pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. And that's when I realized I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself, my happiness, my future, for someone else's problems. I needed to take a step back, to protect myself. It took me a long time to admit it, but I finally understood I had to walk away. From the debts, from the stress, from the toxic spiral that my life had become. I couldn't fix everything, and I couldn't fix everyone. And as much as I loved Claire, I had to let her go too. She had to figure this out on her own, just like I had to figure out how to take care of myself. So, I made the hardest decision of my life. I stopped answering Claire's calls. I stopped trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. It was painful, but it was also the first step in taking back my life. In the end, it took me years to finally walk away. But walking away was the only way I could reclaim my freedom, my peace, and my happiness. I didn't tell Dave about everything I was doing. I couldn't. I felt that I had to handle it on my own, at least until the storm had passed. He already had so much on his plate, and I didn't want to add to his stress, especially when I wasn't even sure how I was going to fix things myself. But as the money started to come together, I couldn't deny the mix of emotions I felt. Guilt for not being upfront with Dave, but also a strange relief that I was making progress. Kept telling myself I was doing the right thing, even if it wasn't exactly the right way to go about it. When I handed Claire the first lump sum of money, I could hear the relief in her voice. She thanked me profusely and promised that everything would be fine now, that she'd take care of the rest. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But as the days and weeks passed, it became clear that she wasn't being entirely honest with me. It wasn't getting better. In fact, it was getting worse. The creditors didn't stop. For every one Claire managed to pay off, 2 more would show up, demanding their money. Soon, I started receiving calls myself. The phone would ring, and I'd pick it up only to hear a cold, demanding voice asking where the money was. They didn't care that I wasn't the one who owed it. They didn't care about the truth. All they knew was that I was connected to Claire, and that made me a target. They knew my name, they had my number, and now they had me in their sights. I didn't tell Dave about the calls. He didn't know how deep I was in, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the lies I was living. Each time the phone rang, I felt a pit form in my stomach, knowing it was someone else demanding payment. Each new threat from Claire's creditors brought more weight onto my shoulders, and with every argument I had with Claire about how she was going to fix things, I felt myself slipping deeper into the mess, both emotionally and financially. I could feel it, the tension between Dave and me. He knew something wasn't right. He could sense the stress in me, but I couldn't admit to him the full extent of what was happening. How could I? How could I explain everything I had done without completely shattering the fragile trust we had left? One night, Claire called me again. Her voice was shaky this time, full of panic and fear. She was hiding. She told me the loan sharks had come to her apartment, and she didn't know where to go. She was trapped. If I didn't help her, she said, they would hurt her. Hearing that fear in her voice triggered something in me. Without thinking, I promised her I would help, even though I didn't have the money. I didn't know where I would find it, but I couldn't let anything happen to her. The next few days were a blur. My mind raced with every call, every secret meeting, every high-pressure decision I had to make. I had never been involved in anything like this before. My life, which had always been so predictable, so quiet, had suddenly turned into a whirlwind of chaos. I was drowning in lies, barely able to keep up with the web of deceit I was spinning. I made excuse after excuse to Dave, telling him I was just stressed from work or dealing with a personal matter. But inside, I was falling apart. As the situation worsened, the weight of what I was involved in became suffocating. Claire's debts weren't just with some shady individuals. They were with people who had connections, who weren't afraid to go to extreme lengths to get their money. I had never imagined I would be tangled up in something so dangerous. The situation became a ticking time bomb, and I had no idea how to defuse it. Then, one evening, as I sat in the living room trying to sort through the financial documents that had been piling up for weeks, Dave came home earlier than usual. He could tell something was wrong. He stopped in the doorway, his gaze lingering on me with a quiet but concerned intensity. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with the weight of unspoken questions. I froze. I couldn't answer him. How could I? How could I explain all of this without breaking him? How could I admit the truth about everything I had kept hidden for so long? I didn't have an answer, and I didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Dave stood there watching me, waiting for some kind of explanation, but I couldn't give him one. How could I tell him that? I had been lying to him for weeks, that I had been secretly handling my sister's dangerous debts, and that now I was too far in to get out? That was when everything finally hit home. Claire sent me another message. She needed to see me, urgently. She was in trouble again, and this time, it was serious. The loan sharks had found her, and they were demanding more than money. They wanted something from me. I didn't understand at first, but when I met her at the rendezvous point, I could see the terror in her eyes. She had signed something that tied me directly to her debt. That's when the full extent of the danger became clear. The loan sharks didn't just want money anymore. They wanted me to pay back everything Claire owed or else. Their words were harsh, cold, and filled with a menace that sent chills down my spine. They weren't playing around. If I didn't get them the money, if I didn't do what they wanted, the consequences would be far worse than anything I could imagine. I was trapped. There was no way out. I had never been this far into something this dangerous. I had no idea how I was going to fix it, or if I even could. The final straw came the next day, when one of the loan sharks showed up at my door. I opened it to find a man standing there, cold eyes staring me down. "You've got something we want," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You know what we're after." My heart pounded in my chest, and in that moment, I realized just how deep I had fallen. This wasn't just about helping Claire anymore. This was about survival. I had been expecting them to come, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer terror I felt when they walked into my house. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, and Dave was at work, leaving me alone to try and hold things together. I had known this day might come, but when it actually happened, everything felt different. The men who entered my home were cold, hard, and ruthless. They didn't care about the state of my life, the weight I had been carrying for so long. They only cared about one thing: money. They were demanding I hand over everything I had. The look in their eyes told me they weren't asking. They were taking. Their words were sharp, harsh, full of menace. I could feel their violent energy in every step they took closer. It was like a shadow creeping over me, suffocating me. And then, in that moment, they made the mistake of pushing me too far. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't let them take everything from me. I refused. I told them, as firmly as I could manage, that I wouldn't give them a penny more. I was shaking inside, but I held my ground. That was when things escalated from bad to worse. The air in the room thickened with anger. They saw my defiance as a challenge, and everything after that was a blur of rage, fear, and regret. My home, which had always been my sanctuary, became a battleground, a place I no longer recognized. The loan sharks grew more aggressive, more desperate. I could see the violence in their eyes as they tried to force me into submission. In that moment, I realized something. This was no longer just about helping Claire. It was about fighting for my own survival. I wasn't just trying to protect her anymore. I was fighting to keep myself safe from the storm I had helped create. I don't even remember how long it lasted, but I remember the fear, the adrenaline coursing through me. I fought, not physically, but mentally. Every part of me screamed to give in, to hand over what they wanted and let them go. But I didn't. I couldn't. In the end, I made it through that night somehow. When the police arrived and the loan sharks were taken away, my body collapsed in exhaustion. It was over. But even as I sat there, still trying to piece myself back together, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had worked so hard to build had been shattered. The next morning, after the dust had settled and the chaos had finally subsided, I looked around the house. The place that had once felt like home now felt alien to me. It was over. Claire was gone. Everything I had sacrificed, all the decisions I had made, had led me to this point. The trust I had built with Dave was gone too. He came home to find me shaken, disheveled, and unrecognizable from the woman I had been when he left. I could see it in his eyes, the hurt, the confusion, the anger, but I couldn't explain. I had tried to protect him from the truth, but now it was all out in the open, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. Dave didn't understand why I had lied, why I had kept so many secrets from him. And as much as I wanted to explain, as much as I wanted to apologize, I knew deep down that it wouldn't matter. The damage had been done. Words couldn't undo the hurt, couldn't bring back the trust that had been broken. Our marriage, like the rest of my life, had crumbled in a matter of weeks. And just like that, everything I had known and thought was stable slipped away. Time passed in a blur after that. Months went by, and I never spoke to Claire again. She was gone from my life, and I was left to try and pick up the pieces. But no matter how hard I tried, the pieces didn't fit together the way they used to. I found a new job, moved into a small apartment, and started doing things I hadn't done in years. Things that I had forgotten about in the chaos of the past. Hobbies, walks in the park, reading books I had once loved. I tried to rebuild some semblance of a life, but the scars from what had happened remained. Dave tried to contact me a few times. I could see his name on my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up. I didn't have the answers he wanted. There was nothing left to say. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. The lies I had told had built walls between us that no apology, no explanation could ever tear down. We were both broken in different ways, and no matter how much time passed, those walls were still there. As for Claire, I heard rumors about her from time to time. How she was still running from the people who had once controlled her life. How she was still in hiding, constantly looking over her shoulder. I thought about reaching out to her, but deep down, I knew I couldn't. I couldn't save her. I couldn't even save myself. I realized, painfully, that I had done everything I could, but there are some battles that aren't ours to fight. Some storms we just can't weather, no matter how much we want to. I couldn't save her, but I could save myself. Slowly, I learned that. I learned to let go of the people who had dragged me down. I learned to move forward, to live for myself. It wasn't easy, but eventually, I realized that the most important person I could take care of was me. My journey had been filled with heartbreak, regret, and a painful realization that sometimes, no matter how deep the bonds, they can break. But in the end, I learned how to survive, and that, in itself, was something I could hold on to. I had survived the storm, but at what cost?